There are 12 notes on the piano, and each of those notes has a major scale. To try and memorise all 12 is just a nightmare. So this handy formula does all the hard work for you. Once you know it, you can find the major scale of any note. So let's take a look. Now if we take our C major scale, and there are 7 notes, C, D, E, F, G, A and B, and then we start again at the C. There's 8 notes in total in this scale, but if we include all of the black notes as well, there's actually 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 13 if you include the top C. So what we can actually do is we can count up by half steps. Now a half step is basically the closest note. So from C, a half step will be this black, because it's the closest if we're going up, or it would be the B, which is a half step down, because it's the closest note down. And from here, a half step would be to the D, half step to this black note, half step to the E, half step to the F, and so on. We can work our way all the way up by half steps, and we can work our way all the way down by half steps as well. Now a whole step is just 2 half steps. So from C, a whole step would be to D, because you're counting 1 half step, 2 half steps. So from D, a whole step would be to the E, 1, 2. From the E, a whole step would be 1, 2, would be to this black note here. And you can do this from any note. So if we're on the C, if I wanted you to go down by a half step, you'd go down to B. If I wanted you to go down by a whole step, 1, 2, you would go down to the B flat. So that's what half steps and whole steps are. So to work out our formula, we're going to count whether we have half steps or whole steps between these notes. So let's start from C to D. Well, we know that C going up to C sharp is a half step, and then C sharp to D is another half step, and 2 half steps create a whole step. So between C and D we have a whole step, so let's put W in here. Next up we have D to E, and it's the same again. D to D sharp is a half step, and then D sharp to E is a half step. So that's a whole step between D and E. So let's put in W. Taking a look between E and F, there's just 1 half step. There's no black notes to count here, so E to F is a half step. That's an H. Let's take a look between F and G. We count 1 half step, 2 half steps. So we have a whole step. Let's put W in there. G to A, same again. G to G sharp is a half step, and G sharp to A is a half step. So 2 half steps is a whole step. Let's put W here because there's a whole step between G and A. A to B is the same. Let's count 1, 2. That's a whole step. Pop that in there as a W. And lastly, we have B to C, and that is just 1 half step. So let's put H here. And there is the formula: whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And you really need to learn this formula because then you can apply it to any major scale. So let's have a closer look at this formula. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Just need to keep saying it and repeating it in your head so you just know it. Let's bring it up. Say it again. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Some people call these tones and semitones. So in classical music and in some other instruments and courses, you will hear these steps referred to as tones. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. So now we know the formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Let's apply it to the G major scale. So let's bring it up and move our formula along. So the G major scale will be the octave of G. Just like the C major scale is C to C, The G major scale is the 8 notes G to G. So all we have to do is count up our half steps. So we know that the G major scale starts with a G because it's the G major scale. And if we look at the first part of our formula, we can see we need a whole note. So let's count up a whole note from G. 1 to G sharp, 2 to A. So here is our whole step and we land on A. So A is the next note in the major scale. So next up in the formula, we can see we need another whole note. So from A, we count 1, 2 half steps and we land on B. So B is the third note in the scale. Next up in our formula, we need a half step. So we count up a half step from B and we land on C. So the fourth note in our G major scale is C. We move along in our formula, we can see we need a whole step. So from C, we count up a whole step, 1 half step, 2 half steps, and we land on D. So D is the next note in the scale. Moving forward with our formula, we need another whole note. So from D, we count 1, 2, and we land on E. So E is the next note in the scale. And up till now, we've got no black notes. It's all white notes. So it's a relatively easy scale to learn. But this is where it changes because we're now on an E. And if we move up in our formula, we can see we need a whole step. So if we count a whole step from E, we need to count up 2 half steps. So 1 half step to F and 2 half steps will be F sharp. So the next note in our G major scale is an F sharp. And finishing off our scale, lastly we need a half step. So from F sharp we count 1 half step and we land on G. And G is the last note in our G major scale. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp and G. I want you to pick any note from the piano. It can be a white note or a black note. The whites will be a bit easier. The black's a bit harder, so you could give yourself a challenge. And I want you to work out the major scale using the formula. And then film yourself playing it and pop it in the Facebook group and we can see how you did. If you don't want to film yourself, you can just write out the notes. So a bit of fun, maybe start with a white note and then you can move on to a black note.